Hey guys, yeah, I know I'm really behind. I finally got the chance to start grading those papers. I like what I see so far, hoping to get at least half of them done by the end of by the next 2 days. Blackboard is great for grading, by the way. I can actually hammer comments right into your submissions and give points. I'm already giving advice on how to revise. Some people are going to have to do a little bit more work than others. Remember, I'm not just going to like hit you in the face with a hammer as far as, the writing of the thing. I'll tell you what to do to make up the difference to get you to the A. Now, oh gosh, I've been running all day. I wasn't in my office for today's office hour session because I had a bit of a medical emergency. I do apologize for that. But, man, Hawthorne. I think I'm going to do 2 video lectures this week because Hawthorne, you can't work with Hawthorne in 10 minutes or even 20. Go ahead and add to the reading list. I wanted you to read The Minister's Black Veil. If you haven't read Minister's Black Veil, go ahead and do that. But also, let's throw in Bartleby the Scrivener. And next week we're gonna really ramp it up. Now, Bartleby the Scrivener is also that's written by Melville, and I'm gonna talk a lot about Melville. So I'm already basically throwing a lot at you today. But for today's lecture, I'm not going to focus too much on Minister's Black Veil yet because I want to introduce the concept of Romanticism to you. And the Romantic era is probably one of my favorite eras of literature just because of how shockingly messed up it was. And I love dark, just despairing crap. So hold on to your butts. It's going to get depressing really, really quick. Now, to kind of lay a foundation here as far as what the Romantic movement is and where it came from, I've been talking to you a lot about historicism, and I've been giving you a lot of historical context as to what our writings are, what their surroundings were, what did the writers think, what did they believe, pointing out a few things here or there. I need to go into a little bit more depth about what came before Romanticism, because this is insanely important. The era of colonialism and even the pre-Romantic writers like Washington Irving, that was the Enlightenment. Now, the Enlightenment, anytime I start talking about the Enlightenment, everybody's pretty much just like, which is okay. I mean, I get it. It doesn't exactly sound like a rave. I've had too much coffee today. I need to take a nap. Anyhow, the Enlightenment, what was interesting about the Enlightenment was it was a reinvigorated focus on reason and rationality. Now, this didn't really include the Puritans because the Puritans looked at everything through a really heavy religious context. They kind of predated or outside of the Enlightenment. But when we look at Thomas Paine and we look at the writings of the Founding Fathers, those guys are dripping with enlightenment. That's their primary approach to everything, is through rationality and reason. It also explains why in America we had this gigantic explosion of political writing. It wasn't just the fact that we had the printing press and people could write, it's because there was renewed interest in basic things like philosophy and actual thought towards existential concepts, which we'll talk about existentialism a little bit later. I know, David, keep the huge words to at least 3 or 4 per video, right? We're talking about the Enlightenment. Now, the Enlightenment ideals were things like reduced emotion. They didn't want things like heavy emotion coming into art. We wanted to be centered and rational in the way that we reacted to things. So it was cool and it was calm. Now, the Founding Fathers, in a lot of ways, fueled the passions as they went after their intellectualism and as they wrote, because, they were in the middle of a war. They were in the middle of a political revolution, and so emotion for them was something that they did use. Paine is very impassioned as he writes. But they are still Enlightenment era, because when you actually read the Constitution, if you ever actually sit down and read the thing for its time, it's pretty freaking well done. It's clever. It's very well thought out, and they were a very close emulation to Plato's philosopher kings. They were smart dudes, man, and they valued intelligence. They valued these things. Now, what's cool about the Romantic movement is you have all these guys coming into the conversation just after the Revolutionary War, and they hate the Enlightenment people. They really disliked them a whole lot. And it's really weird to sit down and think for a minute that people like Hawthorne, Melville, Thoreau, and Wordsworth, they were like, we just can't stand all this intellectualism anymore. Isn't that weird to have like a reaction against intellectualism? Well, it wasn't necessarily intellectualism they were so angry at. It was a kind of reining in of the emotions and an emphasis on reason rather than passion. So the Romantics come in, and they are all about emotion, and they're about passion, and they're about reconnecting with an essential human nature that is supposed to unite us all beyond reason and beyond rationality. So Romantic writers aren't going to obsess so much over, long, tedious arguments and throwing out a bunch of references to stuff. Romantics are much, much more concerned with their emotions and the purity and the beauty of their emotions. And the Romantics, sorry, I was checking the time. I have to bend my head over to make the clock come up. The early Romantics, and I'm sorry, this is going to be one of the holes in my instruction because I never focus on these guys. The early Romantics were people like Wordsworth and Henry David Thoreau. I hate David Thoreau. I hate Henry David Thoreau, which makes me quite the oddball in the literature professor camp, because most people just have t-shirts with Henry David Thoreau's face on it. But for me, reading Walden, his book, the dude wouldn't shut up about his damn beans. I mean, he's got a whole chapter devoted to the cultivation of beans. How much he loves his beans. It was awful. And I'm going to make you read it. I'm going to make you read a whole section of it. I'm going to dig up the bean chapter and I'm going to make you read it. Because I'm not the only one who should have had to have suffered through that. But Thoreau and Wordsworth, these guys, they were trying to get back to an essential human nature. Thoreau's main goal with Walden was to separate himself from society, seclude himself, so that he could find a higher way of living that was based off of his impulses and his drives as kind of an animal, really, although not wholly animal. It was an intellectual endeavor, but he takes a lot of time to just think through life and think through the human experience. And to be fair to Thoreau, as much as I dislike him, he did give us, which this would probably be the best reading for you, and he's a bit of an oddball in this notion as well, because he wrote Civil Disobedience. And as much as I dislike his writing, Civil Disobedience is an incredible piece of writing. A lot of people have based their political movements around civil disobedience. And basically, Thoreau puts forth the argument that if you do not morally support something, the best way to voice your opinion is to disobey that authority, but in a non-violent way. He was involved in a tax matter, and he spent some time in jail, and he wrote Civil Disobedience to talk about the ideal intellectual approach to how to express yourself and how to get through something like that. That was very formative for, Martin Luther King, and I don't know if Gandhi ever read Thoreau. It seems like he may have, but I need to shut my mouth before I say something that's not true. But Thoreau's Civil Disobedience is absolutely essential to the way that, a lot of the most important political movements in our time have developed. So, he's terrible, but he's really, really important as well. Wordsworth defined poetry, and I wish I could go back in time so I could punch Wordsworth in the face because of this. He defined poetry as a spontaneous overflow of emotion. I mean, Wordsworth, dude. It's like, the kid in high school. I can say this because I was that kid. But the kid in the back of the high school classroom with the long black wispy hair, again, I'm making fun of myself. And he's like, nobody feels pain quite the way that I do. And I'm just too good for this place. I feel so much darkness. I need to stop wasting time with that crap. But poetry, for me, is more about skill and about craft and about originality of form and the uniqueness and the beauty of language. But Wordsworth equated it more with emotion. Now, to get to the overall meat and potatoes of this, before I run out of time for this lecture, and this is going to set the stage for Hawthorne, Thoreau and Wordsworth were the transcendentalists. Their romanticism took the form of a high idealism, an idea that man can transcend his natural bounds, and he could become more than what he is. This is writing that is hopeful. It is idealistic, and it looks at man as a beautiful creature that should be understood for his emotions as much as his gift of rationality, and that his real identity comes from his emotions. The Transcendentalists set the stage for my favorite literary authors, the anti-Transcendentalists. Now, the name is just what you think. The anti-Transcendentalists basically stood in juxtaposition to the Transcendentalists. Now, they didn't necessarily hate each other. They weren't fighting. They were friends. They all got along really well. But the anti-Transcendentalists rejected that idealism, and it said, no, human nature is essentially rotten. We're imprisoned to it, and it is a darkness that you can never fully escape from. So Hawthorne and Melville, their points are always drastically depressing, to the point that the wisdom that you gain often will destroy you, and the truth is something that is just as ugly as anything else. We are reacting against the idealism of the Enlightenment and the reason and the rationality, not from a good place. We're saying man is not essentially rational. Man is essentially animal, and that animal is bloodthirsty and violent and stupid. And we never, ever escape that nature. Man, what a dramatic note to end off on. I'll talk to you guys Thursday.